Hi, I want to talk to you about self-mentoring. Kind of give you a little background that may not be in the book, as well as just kind of walk through the activities. So, the first thing I will explain to you is that self-mentoring is actually has a registered trademark. I am the developer of self-mentoring and I own the trademark, the registered trademark on self-mentoring. It's kind of odd to have a term like that trademarked, and it began about 4 or 5 years ago when I actually arrived at the university. And one of the things I realized that self-mentoring seemed to have some momentum. There was some potential there. People really liked it. And I was kind of developing it at that point. So as a safety net, and I do have a background, my doctorate's in business, organizational management, I just thought I would go ahead and trademark it. It would just be a safe thing to do so that someone else couldn't take it and then destroy it or turn it into something else. I wanted it very pure. I knew what I wanted to do with it. So the university, upon hearing about this, decided that, wow, this is a really great idea, what she's done. We're kind of impressed with this. So we're going to invite her in to consider a startup business. I actually already owned a company, so what I did was, for the idea of self-mentoring, I joined forces with the university so that I can actually enjoy the benefit of university resources, and the university gets a percentage of profits. So it's a win-win for both of us, and it's been a real joy to be in a partnership with the university. And it was also the impetus for looking at developing this course. I really didn't feel that we had any appropriate, I shouldn't say appropriate, we probably didn't have any courses really designed on mentoring and executive coaching, and obviously self-mentoring. So the impetus for this was to reach out to people and to see if we have individuals who are really interested in learning more about it. It's my passion. Mentoring, executive coaching, as well as obviously self-mentoring are all very dear to me, and it's really my research focus. So if we think about self-mentoring in itself, if you look at the 4 levels, you'll see some characteristics that are very akin to other programs. If you look at the self-development and self-reflection, self-monitoring stages, those levels, I think what sets self-mentoring apart as a leadership application or a leadership strategy, other than the fact that it induces accountability, but if you back up and take a look at it, it's that self-awareness level. I think that's the level that sets it apart, and it's definitely where my passion is. If you look at the self-awareness stage, and when you read about it in the book, it's really learning all about yourself, learning what makes you tick, what makes you interesting, what your fears are, your phobias. You really are getting to identify who you are. So if you think in terms, and an example I will give you is, I'm a former superintendent of schools, and I'm an introvert. So it's kind of like an oxymoron, because when you're a superintendent of schools, you're in the public eye all the time. You're constantly speaking before groups, soliciting money, funds, graduations. There is never a time that you're not in front of the public eye. You can't even actually grocery shop. So for me, it was really hard to come out of that shell. I was inducted a little bit into that as a principal, and I can remember the first time when we had the old intercoms, you had to speak into the microphone. I was like terrified. I didn't think I could do it. And I eventually kind of got used to that. So being a principal kind of coaxed me into it a little bit. So by the time I got to the superintendency, I pretty much knew what I was in store for, but it took a lot of work and a lot of practice. I know superintendents that are introverts that actually hire PR teams and have other people speak for them. So it doesn't matter which way you do it, whether you overcome the obstacle or whether you find a way around it. That's what self-awareness is. It's getting to know who you are, looking in that mirror, and not seeing these as faults or anything that's a negative, but just identifying them. Okay, these are facts. Okay, let's deal with them and let's move forward. So I really think that when I look at a lot of programs, they really don't spend the time for people to get to know themselves. And once you get to know yourself and you really understand what makes you tick, then it's easier to set an expectation for yourself, and you're more apt to be successful because you know what your strengths are, your assets, and you know what's going to cause you to not be successful. So you got to find a way around it. I am thinking of some of the clients, because self-mentoring is, I do provide it to school districts most of the time free of charge. My clients in the US are basically universities and business, and then I have clients in the UK. But I was working with some line managers, and here was an example of something that they were dealing with. I thought it was a great opportunity to learn. They had gone through the self-awareness stage and identified their personalities and all that, and their frustrations lied in dealing with people that were consuming their time in a negative manner, and they were getting nothing done. It was very troublesome for them. So they in turn decided that, and keep in mind with self-mentoring, you have to determine how you're going to collect the data, what data, that's all up to you. You're in charge. So they decided that, first of all, they needed to really identify how much time they were wasting on individuals with that were basically negative, that were just argumentative, just exhausting, zap the energy out. So they decided they would do it for 2 weeks. And so for 2 weeks, they documented the amount of time. Like, so if they had an incident where they were with someone, they would casually look at their watch, and then, when it was over, and then they would quickly write down how, estimate of how much time they spent, and then they developed a chart, like a Likert scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the most frustrated, and they would rate the frustration. And then they came back together at the end of 2 weeks, and they sit down and looked at their data. How much time was being taken away from them for stuff that was absolutely inconsequential. So once they realized how bad it was, then they decided some strategies, and they developed like 4 different strategies that would use depending on the situation that they got in. And then they monitored again using those strategies for another 2 weeks. And what they found was, obviously, that the amount of time diminished greatly that they were wasting. Now, the research says, if we go back to the Hawthorne experiments, that it may not be that they actually implemented these strategies. It may be just the fact that they called attention to the fact that it existed was enough to alter that behavior. So for them, when they moved into the self-monitoring stage, they already have these behaviors embedded. They now get it. They know what the problem is. They don't have to call attention to it anymore, and they don't have to monitor it anymore. So that really is kind of a great example of the process of how you go through it, and how, it's just that getting to really know yourself, figure out who you are, and what others think of you. I think that sometimes, and I'll definitely use an example as a superintendent. When I was a superintendent, if I base my success on what people said to my face, I was brilliant. I was such a good superintendent. But when I did a cultural assessment at the end of each year, and I took the feedback that was anonymous and compared it to what I was being told, it was like 2 different people. So what we have to understand is, and we know this, that people tell us what they want us to know. People tell us what will make us like them. So it's not a manipulation, it's just human nature. So we have to realize what that is. And if we really want to get in depth, we find out what people really think of us. Because that's how we're really going to make progress and reach our expectations. So as you're thinking about self-mentoring, if you choose to use it, you can actually do a self-mentoring project yourself. Like an internship, you can do a self-mentoring, set an expectation, collect data on it, and do that. Or you can actually teach someone else to do it. So you have both options. But anyway, I hope you enjoy this course, and I especially hope you enjoy learning about self-mentoring. But I think all 3 practices are so vital. They complement each other, and they're all 3 necessary to your success in a profession or even personal life. So anyway, thanks for signing up for the course, and I look forward to talking to you more about self-mentoring.